Old Grognard says, let's look at how Spelljamming Helms and other forms of magical propulsion work in AD&D 2nd Edition's Spelljammer setting. Hello and welcome. This is going to be one of the longest videos I've made so far on this channel. As a result, I think it might fall into grab a drink and a snack territory. I'll leave the decision of whether it is or not up to you. Anyways, there are a couple of Spelljammer specific terms that I want to go over before we get started. You're going to hear them over and over again, so I figured I should explain what they mean. One of them is tonnage and the other is SR. Tonnage is a way of measuring how much volume a ship displaces. When talking about spelljamming drives, this comes into play when describing the minimum and maximum number of tons each drive can propel. If you look at the ship descriptions, they all have their tonnage listed, and you can compare a ship's tonnage to the tonnage ratings a drive has, and figure out if that drive will be able to propel that ship. A ton of displacement, or spatial ton as they call it, is equal to 100 cubic yards or 2,700 cubic feet of displacement. One way of visualizing this is that 1 ton is roughly a 14-foot cube, so whatever a ship's tonnage is, it displaces that many 14-foot cubes. The other term that gets used a lot when describing ship drives is SR. SR stands for ship's rating and is basically how fast a ship can go. In tactical combat, SR determines how many hexes a ship can move, and when traveling in atmosphere, each point of SR translates to 17 miles per hour. So, now that we've got that bit of context out of the way, let's look at the various types of arcane propulsion described in Concordance of Arcane Space, starting with Spelljamming Helms. Each minor and major Spelljamming Helm allows the individual seated upon it to move a large mass through space by means of channeling spell energy directly into a motive force. This energy is somewhat useful for maneuvering the ship, but primarily it provides the push that makes the ship move forward or backward. Maneuvering comes primarily from the ship's sails and oars. The block of text I just read mentions that there are 2 types of Spelljamming Helm, the Major Helm and the Minor Helm. I'm going to put this table up here and I'm going to use it to explain the differences between these 2 devices. So, as you can see here, the main differences between major and minor helms come down to cost, tonnage limits, and speed. So, let's look here at the listed price. The prices shown here are based on what the character can expect to pay for a helm if they purchase it from the arcane. In other situations, the price may vary up or down, usually up. The tonnage limits shown here are based on spatial tons. Like I said earlier, if a ship's tonnage is higher than what a helm can support, the helm will not function. So for example, if you put a major or minor helm on a squid ship, it would work just fine since the squid ship is 45 tons. However, if you put that same minor helm on a hammer ship, it wouldn't work since the hammer ship is a 60-ton vessel, and therefore displaces more than 50 tons. In order to move the hammer ship, you would need a major helm. There's also a minimum tonnage for a Spelljamming Helm to work, so if the vessel it's connected to is less than 1 spatial ton, it won't work. If there is someone out there wondering if you could take a Spelljamming Helm that wasn't bolted to anything and sit on it and go flying around, the answer is no. It has to be connected to a structure that is at least 1 spatial ton. Now, how fast the ship is able to move, shown here, is based on whether the helm is a major or minor helm, and then also on the level of the caster operating it. I say caster for this part because although the text mostly refers to mages doing the spell jamming, other classes can spelljam as well. So a bard, ranger, or paladin, once they get spellcasting ability, they can operate a spelljamming helm. Whether you use their actual level or their spellcasting level for this is up to the DM. Anyways, this table is based on the one that's on page 34 of Concordance of Arcane Space. However, I thought it would be a good idea to add in the airspeed for each SR entry that's on the table. This is because the players will sometimes decide to travel between two locations on the same planet via spelljamming ship. This type of travel is a lot faster than what folks might be used to in, quote, normal D&D. For example, if you were traveling somewhere 200 miles away, instead of taking days or possibly weeks depending on the terrain, a ship with an SR of 1 could get there in only 12 hours. Another thing to take into account here is that none of this matters if a ship is moving at spelljamming speed, since spelljamming speed is the same for all vessels. One of the house rules I like related to SR is that a ship that's more than 50 tons using a major helm uses the column for a minor helm when determining how fast it goes, and the faster speed over here is only used for ships that are 50 tons or less when using a major helm. The idea is that the major helm is intended for larger ships, and therefore if you put it in a smaller ship, you get increased performance. So regardless of if you run SR rules as written or with the house rule I just mentioned, the SR shown is for ideal circumstances. There are two situations that can reduce the SR below what's listed on the table. One of those situations is if a character casts spells before operating the helm. The rating on the table assumes the spellcaster is well rested and hasn't used any of the spells they could possibly memorize and or cast. Every spell cast before activating the helm lowers the ship's SR by 1. Regardless of how many spells the caster casts, however, the SR won't go below 1. So in other words, casting spells before spelljamming will make your ship slower, but you don't have to worry about casting too many spells and then not being able to move your ship. The other situation that can lower SR is if a character stays on the helm for more than 12 hours. For each additional hour beyond 12 the character stays on the helm, the ship's SR is reduced by 1. Similar to how casting before spelljamming works, the lowest the SR will drop down to is 1. The character can continue to use the helm for a total of up to 24 hours, but once they reach 24 hours, they pass out and they can't get back on the helm until they're fully rested. In game terms, that means they've slept and rested sufficiently to regain spells. As for spelljamming itself, when a character sits down on or in the spelljamming helm and activates it, several things happen. The helmsman will feel a warm sensation over their entire body as the ship becomes an extension of their awareness. The helmsman is vaguely aware of what's happening on the ship and can perceive what's happening at any point as if they were standing on the deck by focusing their attention at that point. One of the disadvantages of this is that if the ship is damaged, the helmsman will feel it, and if the ship takes damage and receives a critical hit, there's a small chance the helmsman will be overwhelmed by the pain and be knocked unconscious. While the helmsman is connected to the helm, they can talk normally, but they can't move without severing their connection to the helm. They can, however, move the ship just by thinking about it. This is primarily limited to going forward and backward, but the helmsman can do rudimentary maneuvers by thought alone. In game terms, most ships are reduced to maneuverability class F, which is the worst maneuverability class, if no one is operating the sails, oars, or other rigging to help maneuver the ship. Once a character sits down on the helm and activates it, they're locked in what you could call spelljamming mode, where they can't cast any spells, until they have a chance to rest sufficiently to regain spells. The text also says they can't cast spells during the 24-hour period that they operate the helm. I generally ignore the 24-hour part since it just makes the game more complicated without making it any better, and have the character able to cast spells once they get the chance to rest sufficiently to regain spells. This spelljamming mode persists even if the character isn't on the helm or only operates it for a short period of time. There are various explanations for this in game terms, but I figure it was a game design choice so that the DM and the players aren't having to calculate how many spells the helm consumes or doesn't, and instead they were just like, if you spelljam, you can't cast spells until you get a chance to rest and regain spells in order to avoid the bookkeeping. I also need to mention that even though a character loses the ability to cast spells and is in spelljamming mode, they can't control the ship unless they're actually on the helm. If they get up and walk around, the helm ceases functioning and the ship will sit still or drift, depending on the situation. This also happens if they're knocked unconscious by a critical hit. Some of the other characteristics of spelljamming helms are that a ship can't have two helms active at the same time, or neither will function. This doesn't mean you can't have more than one helm, just that you can't use more than one at the same time. Another characteristic of spelljamming helms is that they are nearly indestructible. When making item saving throws, all of a helm's saving throws are a 2. If you're curious about how item saving throws work in 2nd edition, I have a video for that. The link is in this video's description and also in the end cards. There are 2 other propulsion methods described in Concordance of Arcane Space that I want to cover at this point, and those are the Crown of the Stars and the Ceres Helm. The Crown of the Stars is a nearly priceless item that functions in a similar fashion to a minor helm in most respects, but has some serious advantages over a standard minor helm. Rather than being a large chair that is bolted to the deck of a ship, the Crown of the Stars is a wearable item. Although it's called a Crown of the Stars, it doesn't have to always take the form of a crown. It can also be a necklace, belt, girdle, or other wearable item as long as it isn't a ring. Crowns of the stars, regardless of their form, are always described as all being much larger than rings and are also described as always containing some silver. Like I mentioned earlier, the Crown of the Stars functions as a minor helm but has some major advantages. The helmsman wearing the crown can move about while also controlling their ship. They can also control their ship if they are not on board as long as they are a mile or less away from the ship. If the crown is used to power a ship for a week or more, it becomes bonded to that ship. In order to break the bond and be able to control a different ship, the crown has to be away from the ship it's bonded to for at least 1 week. A Crown of the Stars also won't affect a ship with an active spelljamming helm. It doesn't say this in the description, but I would also extend this to mean that it won't function on a ship with any other form of active magical propulsion, like a Ceres helm or a furnace, for example. Beyond what I've talked about so far, the rules for how the Crown of the Stars functions in specific situations aren't well defined and are up to the DM. My suggestion is that if you put a Crown of the Stars into your game, you might want to give it limitations to help define its powers. This will make your job easier when you have to adjudicate what it can and can't do. For example, you might have the crown work where the user has to do something specific to bond it to a ship, and that they can only control a ship if the crown has been bonded to it. It might be a bonding ritual, or maybe they have to stay on the ship for a certain period of time. You might even have a separate item, for example, a box that goes below deck or a figurehead that the players would have to bolt to the ship in order for the crown to control it. This could even turn into a plot hook for an adventure or series of adventures. The players might find the crown and then have to track down the other part that bolts to the ship, or they might end up in a situation where it's the other way around, where they find the part that bolts to the ship and then have to find the crown in order to control it. Regardless of how you want to run it, just keep in mind that the Crown of the Stars is a powerful item and should be handled with caution. So if the Crown of the Stars is a superior deluxe version of the standard minor helm, then the series helm is an inferior workaround that was created for creatures with spell-like abilities and no experience levels who wish to engage in spelljamming. The series helm is most often associated with mind flayers, but there are versions made for other creatures to harness their spell-like abilities for magical propulsion. The series helm gets its name from the fact that you can link more than one of them together to increase how fast a ship can go. A ship with series helms equipped will have an SR equal to however many of its helms have a creature operating them. For example, if a ship with 3 series helms linked together has all 3 of its helms occupied, it will have an SR of 3. If there are only 2 helms occupied, it'll have an SR of 2, and if only 1 is occupied, it drops to 1. The book doesn't give a hard limit for how many series helms can be linked together, but it does say that Illithids generally have between 2 and 5 helms linked together on their ships. Keep in mind that each series helm costs 75,000 gold pieces, so setting up a vessel to run on series helms can be an expensive undertaking. Regardless of how many series helms there are linked together, they can't be used to power a vessel of over 50 spatial tons. They also have a minimum vessel tonnage of 5 tons in order to function. There are a couple of other limitations to series helms that makes them inferior to a standard helm. One is that if a creature in a linked helm dies for whatever reason, the series is temporarily disrupted and the ship loses motive power for 1 round. When this happens, the rest of the creatures in the series have to make successful saving throws, or they die as well. The book says the saving throw is versus magic, so I assume they mean death magic, since death is involved, but I guess you could also interpret that to mean a save versus spell. The other disadvantage is that series helms have all of their saving throws at 3 rather than 2 like a regular spelljamming helm. A saving throw of 3 is still really good though. Like I said earlier, a series helm is designed for one specific type of creature to operate it. So you aren't going to have brownies operating a helm designed for mind flayers. Because of this, I imagine series helms have wildly varying appearances based on who is using them. While a series helm used by mind flayers might look like this, a series helm used by Fey folk might look like interconnected seed pods that the operators climb into to power the ship. One of the things that's good about this is that you can use the appearance of a series helm to really help convey that a ship belongs to a certain type of creature. So far, we've looked at spelljamming helms and a couple of devices that could be described as spelljamming helm variants. Now we're going to look at 3 more arcane propulsion devices that all have in common the idea that they consume fuel of some kind rather than functioning off of the power of spells or spell-like abilities. The first of these is the furnace. Furnaces are described as being an early and primitive form of spelljamming helm. The listed price for a furnace is 100,000 gold pieces. The basic idea behind how a furnace works is that magic items are fed into it, and in the process of being destroyed, their energies are harnessed for magical propulsion. How the furnace works in game terms is that items are fed into it one at a time. Each 1000 XP an item is worth will translate into 1 week of the ship being able to move with an SR of 2. Items that are immune to fire can't be used and are unaffected if put in the furnace. The SR can be increased to 3 if a second item is put in the furnace, but there is a 25% chance that this will cause the furnace to explode and inflict 10 to 100 points of damage to everyone and everything within a 30-foot radius. The text doesn't specify if the furnace survives or not, and it doesn't list saving throws for the furnace either. So you could run this as the furnace venting excess magical energy rather than it actually exploding and being destroyed if you so choose. Furnaces also have no listed tonnage limits. I put the tonnage a standard furnace can support as being between 1 and 100 tons, but you may have something else in mind. Furnaces are my favorite form of arcane propulsion that they introduced in the Spelljammer setting. This is because a lot of the details of how they work are left open-ended, so you can fill them in however you want. One example of this is how the furnace is operated. Maybe it has a bunch of levers on the side that you pull to make the ship go in different directions. Who knows? It's also a good spelljamming device to use if you just want to do some limited spelljamming without taking on the full setting. One of the reasons for this is that it can't be used to leave a crystal sphere because it'll explode if it enters the phlogiston. It's also expensive enough to operate that the players won't be using it all the time to do everything. If you want to increase the flexibility with which you can fuel a furnace, a house rule I use is that for every 50 XP a magic item is worth, it'll run the ship for 8 hours. This allows the players to use lesser magic items to power their ship, even if it will only work for a short period of time. One of the other things I like to use furnaces for is if I'm running a 5e based game and want to do some spelljamming. This is because I don't have to worry about how the game's spellcasting system interfaces with Helms, and it gives the party something to do with useless magic items. An added bonus is that I also don't have to worry about them leaving the crystal sphere because explosions. And yes, if I'm running spelljamming in 5e, there are crystal spheres and phlogiston. In addition to the standard furnace, I have ran a couple of variants of the furnace in-game that have worked out well. One is the industrial furnace. It takes up 1 ton of space on a ship and costs 200,000 gold pieces. The industrial furnace can be used to propel a ship of 100 to 300 spatial tons with an SR of 1. This is fun for world building since you can have 300-ton barges flying around hauling freight between the different planets, moons, and asteroids. The other variant I have ran is where the furnace runs on fuel rods and is only powered by magic items in extreme situations. Fuel rods are a type of magic item that is completely useless, except that it counts as 4 times its XP or gold piece value when used as furnace fuel. I know this isn't technically a furnace variant, but the way fuel rods change the game is enough that it might as well be. Fuel rods become something that the players will actively look for, and NPCs will sometimes use fuel rods to bargain with the player characters in order to get them to do stuff. Anyways, I've geeked out enough about furnaces and how much I like them and what I use them for. Let's move on to the next item, the Artifurnace. The Artifurnace is said to be the ultimate evolution of the spelljamming furnace. The Artifurnace isn't merely a furnace that has an artifact shoved into it. Artifacts can't normally be destroyed by fire, so a regular furnace would have no effect on them. Instead, an Artifurnace is a furnace that is specially constructed to draw power from a specific artifact. As long as the artifact and the Artifurnace are together, neither can be damaged. However, if the artifact is removed from the Artifurnace will cease functioning and will be destroyed. Due to how rare artifacts are, Artifurnaces are also extremely rare and as a result are priceless. In addition to any problems one will have from being in the possession of an artifact, they also have to deal with those who would want the Artifurnace for themselves. The defined powers of an Artifurnace are that if it is installed on a ship, it propels a ship with an SR of 5 with unlimited endurance. The other powers of an Artifurnace are not well defined. There isn't a maximum or minimum tonnage listed, but I would rule it as being at least equal to a major helm, if not greater. It's also not stated whether or not an Artifurnace explodes in the phlogiston, so if it does, the host vessel is stuck in one crystal sphere. However, you might be able to get to other crystal spheres via planar travel or some other method, since after all you are dealing with an artifact that has a machine built around it to extract its power. You also might end up with the event horizon, so just keep that in mind. The decision to introduce an Artifurnace into the game space should be carefully considered. This is even more so than it is with the Crown of the Stars. The owners will have great power at their disposal, but will also have all of the headaches of owning an artifact, so it's a good idea to consider these things carefully. The last propulsion method we'll look at under drives that use fuel of some kind is the Lifejammer. Instead of drawing power from magic items or artifacts, the Lifejammer draws its power from the life energy of the creature placed inside of it, whether they wish for this to happen or not. The Lifejammer is considered to be a most cruel and evil way to power a ship, and is most often associated with the Neogi, who are believed to be its inventors. The Neogi don't normally sell Lifejammers to outsiders, but if they sell them to each other, the listed price is 80,000 gold pieces. How the Lifejammer works is that it can draw life energy from any creature that has hit points. Rules as written, the Lifejammer could be powered by undead or constructs, but I don't think anyone would fault you if you required the creature in the Lifejammer to be, alive. Each day of operation, the creature in the Lifejammer must save versus death in order to remain living, and if the save is successful, the creature takes 1d8 points of damage. While imprisoned within the Lifejammer, the creature cannot regain hit points. The vessel's SR is determined using the minor helm column on the Spelljamming helm table, with the hit dice or level of the creature being drained substituted for caster level. Some of the other characteristics of the Lifejammer are not well defined. We don't know the tonnage limits for such a device, but the Neogi do have ships of up to 100 tons, so it might be able to move ships of equal tonnage to a major helm. It also isn't stated when the creature within the device makes their saving throw. My ruling on that is that it's at the end of the day or when the creature is removed. Another item that is vague is how the drive is controlled. I've seen it where folks said the creature in the cage controls the ship, but to me that doesn't make any sense. I prefer to run the Lifejammer where it functions like a furnace with levers and such to control the ship, but instead of feeding on magic items, it feeds on the life force of those who are unfortunate enough to be fed into it. The last 4 drive methods we'll look at all have in common that they are associated with specific races of demi-humans or monsters, are unusual, and are unlikely to be used by player characters. Let's start with the Orbus. An Orbus is a beholder variant that is used as a living spelljamming engine. Whether they are an altered version of a standard beholder or a separate species the beholders created isn't really clear. The Orbus appears as a beholder with non-functioning vestigial eye stalks and a toothless mouth. The monster entry lists it as having an intelligence stat of 0 and neutral alignment. It basically has no will or mind of its own. This is reflected in its THAC0 being listed as nil and its damage per attack as 0. However, the main eye's anti-magic effect is still active. When I read the description of the Orbus as being a mindless creature that only exists to propel beholder ships, I imagined it having a feeding apparatus connected to it that allows it to be fed a steady stream of food paste or whatever the beholders feed in Orbus these days. I then drew what this might look like and decided to use it for this video. Anyways, I thought I'd just mention that. How beholders use the Orbus is that one or more of them are kept near the center of the ship with the hive leader or great mother. Beholders will not trade an Orbus to non-beholders, nor will they tolerate non-beholders being in possession of them. If an Orbus is in danger of being captured by non-beholders, beholders will disintegrate them rather than let this happen. As a spelljamming drive, an Orbus can create enough energy to move 20 tons. 2 can move 40 tons, and 3 or more can move 60 tons. Each Orbus increases the ship's SR by 1 to a limit of 5. If the number of them on a ship is not enough to move the ship's tonnage, but the ship is less than 60 tons, then the ship's SR is reduced to 1. For example, if a 60-ton ship had 4 of these guys on board, it would have an SR of 4. If they lost one of them, the SR would be 3 because they have 3 remaining and they are enough to support the ship's tonnage. If they lost another Orbus, their SR would be reduced to 1 because 2 of them are only rated for 40 tons. Hopefully that makes sense. That's all I've got for the beholders and the Orbus. Now let's look at another drive system that's associated with mind flayers, and that's the Pool Helm. The Pool Helm is a rare form of propulsion used exclusively by mind flayers. It harnesses the mental power of the Elder Brain's brine pool to provide propulsion to a vessel. Such vessels have an SR of 5, and it is rumored that a pool helm can propel a vessel that displaces up to 200 tons. Not much else is said about the pool helm, other than it has a cost of 500,000 gold pieces when traded among mind flayers, and that the pool counts as 2 crew members. Now let's look at the Dwarven Forge. The Dwarven Forge is a massive drive system powered by large numbers of dwarves creating items, and the creative energy they produce as a byproduct. Forges are placed in asteroids ranging from 100 to 700 tons. A forge takes up 2 spatial tons, or 200 cubic yards, for every 50 dwarves involved in creative propulsion. A dwarvish space factory constructed in this fashion will have an SR of 1 for every 100 dwarves that are put to work. A byproduct of said creative propulsion is that each month the asteroid ship is in space, the forge activity produces 10,000 gold pieces worth of trade goods. Eventually, the dwarves will use up all of the raw materials available to them in their asteroid. Once this happens, they'll move to another asteroid and take their forge with them. In Concordance of Arcane Space, it says abandoned mountain ships become the lairs of monsters, but I could see them being used for other things, like pirate bases, lairs for reclusive wizards, or any number of other things. The last propulsion device we'll look at is the Gnomish Helm. These are usually non-functional unless they have a helm of some kind built into them. Gnomish Helms should be unique and often contain other spelljamming engines within their workings. The characteristics listed in their description is that they occupy at least 1 ton of space and that their SR is determined by the level of spellcaster operating them. Only about 60% of Gnomish Helms work and 40% are non-functional. A Gnomish Helm requires between 2 and 8 gnomes to maintain it, and there is a 20% chance at any time that the helm will break down for 2 to 8 turns. This is usually when it's needed the most. Like I said earlier, each Gnomish Helm should be unique. I like to have them be variants of the furnace, but that's mostly because I like furnaces. They will also sometimes contain a minor helm. An idea that came to mind while working on this video was that there's a group of gnomes who have a helm that actually works really well. The player characters get suspicious, however, when they notice the gnomes buying large quantities of food whenever they're in port, and it's always something really specific. After some investigation, they find that the gnomes have an Orbus or 2 hidden inside their helm, and that the helm is basically their life support system. My overarching point with all of this is that Gnomish Helms should be strange and unusual, and that when you're the DM, you should have fun with them. So the drive methods I've covered here are what's in Concordance of Arcane Space. Later spelljamming materials have other ship drive methods listed in them, and I might do a video covering some of them when I get access to more Spelljammer material. If you have any questions, cool stories, or other things you'd like to say, please do so in the comments section. If you found this video useful, please leave a like and share it with someone else who might find it useful. As always, thanks for watching. Nikola Tesla's giant pigeon and I would like to wish you a wonderful rest of your day.